classic albums, the ones that stand out beyond the rest and stay relevant and influential for years. Sometimes they did something different, sometimes they were just plain great. However they did it, they are now considered classics for the foreseeable future. I want to say that this video is directly inspired by this Carson Runquist video, where he goes over modern movies that he thinks will be classics. Great video, I love his channel, so I thought it would be cool to do a music equivalent of that and go over some modern albums that I think will be classics. Now in this list, I try to keep it to pretty big artists post 2015, ones that I honestly think will be a name that you could just bring up to anybody in this generation 30 years in the future and they'll be like, oh my god, I remember when that came out. I was bumping that shit all summer. So none of these are albums I just like. In fact, some of them I'm not a huge fan of, but they are all albums that I genuinely think will be classics. Charli XCX's latest album. If you somehow got through last year without hearing about it and hearing at least one of the songs off of it, you're either lying or an alien. I never could have guessed the huge success and pop culture staple that this album would become so quickly, especially with how casual the rollout was. But this album quickly became a cultural phenomenon, unlike anything I've seen in quite a while.
Oh, that is slutty ass production. I'm sorry.
One song would go viral off the album, people would get tired of that, and then another song would go viral. People would get tired of that one, and then another one would get viral. It was seriously unescapable if you were on social media. But something about the casual authenticity and simplicity of this album and Charli's whole demeanor, I think really resonated with what people wanted to see out of a modern pop star. It's a slightly existential party album that's not trying to be anything that it's not. It's just Brat. It also has such great production. God, I love A.G. Cook. Look, I love Magdalena Bay, and as much as I'm more of a fan of their previous album, Mercurial World, Imaginal Disc was really the album to put them on the map. You'll notice a lot of the albums in this list are ones that did something bold, and that's purposeful, because when an artist does something risky and it happens to go over well, that's what makes something really memorable. Before this album, Magdalena Bay's work had been mostly indie pop with this retro, arcadey, electronic influence, and this album went in a way different direction, turning into this sprawling, psychedelic prog rock journey, along with these really interesting visuals that go along perfectly and really help build this whole Imaginal Disc world. And as much as I personally loved their previous sound more, you can't deny that it sounds like they were born to make stuff like this.
Which is why I'm feeling a light to decent 9 on it. Trans.
This is the only album on this list that I think might be pushing it, because Brakence is not nearly as much of a household name as everyone else on this list, but this is one of those albums that has only gotten better and better with time and grown more and more of a somewhat cult fan base. To me, this album encapsulates hyperpop perfection, or at least as close as someone other than Sophie could get to that. I know it's not really entirely hyperpop. There's rap, Midwest emo, and all this other stuff all over the album, but the genre was always about self-expression and creativity, and I think that this is one of the best forms of that I've seen. I had mixed thoughts on this album initially, mostly with the lyrics feeling a little immature at times, but I've come to really appreciate the raw authenticity of it, and it's been consistently growing more and more on me throughout the years. And baking off the fact that I think Brakence will keep getting better and better, I think people will look back at this album as kind of a pivotal record and turning point for not only hyperpop, but the overall experimental side of pop music as a whole. I feel like if you've heard this album, there's not a lot I gotta say. From the moment this album came out, it's hard to listen to it without thinking, damn, this is a classic. I don't really know the last time I heard a single album attempt to mimic a sound from the past and pull it off, not just extremely well, but effortlessly. Clairo was already making great stuff, but it was a little more surface level, catchy bedroom pop. And not to put that stuff down at all, it's still fantastic, but Charm? This is an album that I could totally see getting compared directly to the stuff from 50 years ago that inspired it. None of it feels forced or misses the mark. If you've seen the movie The Holdovers, it came out a couple years ago and perfectly recreated the visuals, audio, and just overall vibe of a film from the 70s. So much so that you could put it next to an actual film from that time period, and if you didn't know any better, you would think it belongs. And to me, Charm is the album equivalent of that. Sophie. If you ever heard this album and thought, damn, why does the production sound so out there and good? Sophie and Flume. This is such a unique rap album and does things that I still haven't really heard much of since. I feel like this is one of those cult albums that even though not a lot of people talk about it currently, give it like 10 years and people will be appreciating it the appropriate amount. It felt so out of left field at the time and feels even more now seeing that Vince hasn't put out anything similar since. It's crazy to think that this hip-hop album from an otherwise fairly straightforward hip-hop artist had sounds in it that would be influential to hyperpop and modern pop music back in 2017, years before hyperpop even had a name yet. I fully think that this album is just sitting there marinating, waiting for people to discover it and give it the love that it deserves.
You live in my dream state.
A lot of people tend to point to Igor as Tyler the Creator's classic, which isn't surprising given how creative and experimental that album was for the time it came out. And while I don't disagree, I do think that that album could fit here as well. There's something about Flower Boy that makes it the most memorable Tyler album to me, one that I'll be thinking about when I'm 50. Before Flower Boy, Tyler had a completely different image. We hadn't really seen him be vulnerable in his music yet, and that's what made this album feel so special. It felt like even Tyler was fighting himself for letting this side of him out, with the original title being Scumfuck Flower Boy, feeling like a way of Tyler making this vulnerable and pretty album mean and crude in some way. I see artists influenced by this album's sound all the time, and I don't think it's stopping anytime soon. Put your pitchforks away, guys. To be a classic doesn't always necessarily mean it has to be perfect. In fact, this album is far from that. But I still think that in 30 years, people will talk about this album like it's a classic. I feel like it's a little too soon to say the same for I Am Music, but with it being 5 years since the release of this album and how much it has influenced its own kind of corner of hip-hop since then, I think we're already seeing the effects of this album on music, and I only think it's going to grow in influence more and more. This thing combined trap and punk in a way I didn't think was possible, and I completely understand people that hate this album. My opinion kind of flip-flops on it every day, but if anything, this album showed a lot of artists that it's cool to put out an album that's totally out of left field from your usual sound, kind of like 808s and Heartbreak did back in the day, but in a very different way. Look, if we're talking classics, The Weeknd has to be here. I'm not the biggest fan of The Weeknd stuff all the time, but I do honestly believe that in the future he will be referred to as one of the greats of pop music in this era. I don't want to say he'll be equal to Michael Jackson, but he might be as close to someone like that we have. I always find it really impressive how little the dude has used any kind of social media or anything that most current artists use by default. He's simply as popular and huge as he is because of his crazy talent and the quality of stuff he puts out. And while I thought the entirety of his last trilogy was pretty good, I think After Hours is not only one of his most perfect albums, but just one of the most perfect pop R&B albums ever. Back in high school, I would listen to new albums that I got into for entire days on end, and I will always remember when this album came out, I could not stop listening to it. Something in this man's high-pitched voice awakened something in me. Like, I must have listened to this album at least 30 times in full in the first week. It's dark, it's brooding, but it's also playful and unserious. Atrocity Exhibition really creates this atmosphere that puts you into the headspace of Danny's world at the time. It's hard to explain really the feeling of this album, but it's almost like puppeteering a dead body to be having fun and partying. You know, Weekend at Bernie's, but dark. I hate to say that one of Danny's most drug-fueled albums will be a certified classic, but there's something really special about this album that I don't think could have been replicated by anybody other than Danny Brown. All right, here's some rapid-fire ones that are definitely going to be classics. I just don't have a lot to say about them. Yeah, this one needs to cool off a bit after being so overplayed, but once it does, this is going straight in the Pop Hall of Fame.
Sit down.
Basically, all of Kendrick's discography are either already classics or going to be classics, but this is one that I do feel like the appreciation will come back around on really hard. Yeah, Porter Robinson is just built different. This album has got to be the best representation of overcoming burnout and depression that I've ever heard, and I think it'll age really well.
Wish I knew
Yeah, this is one of those that unfortunately the TikTok timer has got to cool down quite a bit on, and once people forget how overplayed that one song was, they'll realize how amazing the rest of this album is. That's the video. Let me know in the comments if there's any future classics that I missed. I know this was maybe a boring list, but I tried my best to think about it as realistically as possible, and for the most part, not let my personal taste get in the way. Thanks for watching. If you liked the video, feel free to leave a like. And if you really liked the video, hit the subscribe button. If you're already subscribed, here's your complimentary blustre point. Bye.